Hello, my name is Derek Young. I'm president of YMG Enterprises, and I am so glad that you're joining us for the C-Seat. The C-Seat, very simply, is an opportunity for us to hear directly from leaders who understand the importance of corporate culture. Leaders who, over a period of time, have done what it takes to make sure their culture helps them drive the results that they want. I'm very excited today to be talking with a person who's a friend, somebody I admire, who has done a lot for our city. He's the president and CEO of the Nashville Chamber of Commerce, Ralph Schulz. How you doing, sir?
Doing great, Derek. Great to be here with you.
So, right off the bat, what do you think about Nashville and what's been going on in the last 5 years or so?
Nashville's another one of those great overnight successes that started the work to become an overnight success 25 years ago.
Right.
You know, it's what's happening in Nashville is really evidence of great community involvement, collaboration, public-private partnerships. But, you know, we're a magnet for young people. About 1,500 of them are coming to town every month.
Every month, yep.
And business is growing, and opportunities growing, and prosperity's growing.
You know, I remember you came on board as the head of the chamber at the time. I was actually on the board of the chamber, so it's been really neat for me to be able to watch what you've been doing. What is the role of the Nashville Chamber of Commerce?
Well, as you know, it's what we've been doing together. The role of the Nashville Chamber, our purpose is to facilitate community leadership to create economic prosperity. So we recognize as an organization, we're a process organization. We just take the will of the community leadership and start to support it happening.
Right.
So really, the Chamber's functioned really well over these last 8 years or so because we have great clarity on our role.
You know, speaking of the notion of clarity on the role, as the CEO, ultimately you're the person who's sort of responsible for that vision being set, being carried out. What have been, Ralph, in your mind, some of the really most significant things you've been able to do to keep the culture of the chamber alive and well?
Well, you know, I think one of the things we benefited from is clarity at the top. Our board of directors, our board leadership 9 years ago created a set of bylaws to make sure that they had the proper role and they had the proper engagement and decision making. Daryl Freeman was the guy that put that all together and led it, and it was really a sea change of opportunity for the organization. So the board really said, okay, we're going to be responsible, we're going to be accountable, we're going to be in charge of making policy and setting direction, but we want you as staff to execute that direction. Part of our role, part of our leadership role, is to stimulate that conversation.
Certainly.
So we use research and we use community conversation to prep our board to do that kind of work. But really it starts at the top with a clarity of purpose, facilitating community leadership to create economic prosperity. That gives us our playground, our universe. And then understanding what people expect from us. We're a place where they can belong to an organization of similar values, engage in the activity, and lead on the things that they're passionate about. And then finally, we have to have a clear understanding of what we do well.
That's good.
And what we're expected to do well.
One of the things that I've seen along that line is, as you sort of describe some of those key components of the chamber and what the chamber is all about, I've seen the chamber stay pretty focused and not, you know, you see some organizations, they change their mission every 2 or 3 years. They change the direction. How's that been valuable to the chamber and to the city as a whole?
Well, when you have prosperity in your purpose statement, you can be involved in almost anything.
Right.
And I think our leadership understands, and our staff understands, there's a limit to resources, so you really have to focus on the most important things. Well, if education is the absolute basis of individual prosperity, you got to stay focused on education. Now we've seen transit and housing emerge as needs, because those are the things that are going to also affect the individual's ability to be prosperous. So if we're going to succeed as an organization, we have to stay really focused. and our board expects us to stay focused, and our leadership expects us to stay focused.
You know, one of the things I know about you and your leadership style is that something I strongly believe in, and something we say to our clients, is that you want your culture to be so clear, so well defined that people know whether they belong or not when it comes to being a part of the team.
Right.
Talk about that a little bit, and sort of how you even develop that approach as a leader.
Well, clarity is king to me, especially with an organization that's got such a broad purpose and got such a broad reach, 14 counties in the area. So if you're going to get clarity, it's not something you get overnight. It's what emerges from conversation. So because the people we're engaged with are busy and sometimes less informed rather than more informed, you have to be patient and have a conversation, have a dialogue, and be inclusive of people who may agree with the view or may disagree with the view. If you can create a place that's data-based, and that's what Garrett Harper provides us, is great research.
Yes.
Then you can start to have a discussion about the principles that you care about as a group. And when everyone can decide on the principles, then we can start to talk about what are we going to do about it.
That's good.
So it takes years. Those things I mentioned to you earlier, the purpose, the values, the competencies, we didn't know those things in a day or a week. It took a few years to really get clarity on all of that.
No, that's good. You know, one of the things too, when we start talking about culture, is it's very easy to talk about culture when you're the it city, when like you said, 1,500 young people are moving here every month. But our city, our country, obviously several years ago went through a phenomenal economic downturn.
Correct.
How did you keep the culture of the chamber alive and thriving when economically speaking it was not looking good?
You know, Derek, that is a great question. Nashville already had its recovery baked into its DNA. For us, it was just reminding people that recovery was already baked into its DNA. If you go all the way back to the Civil War with Nashville's economic start as a distribution center, you see peaks and valleys in the economy.
Right.
But this is a collaborative community with a high level of entrepreneurship. That means you've got creative, adaptive people modifying what they do to fit the environment.
Right.
So all we had to do was say, hey, let's remember what Nashville is. And Nashville propelled itself out of the recession, which, by the way, is a trend. We've looked at economic recessions, depressions, and what were called panics in the past. And virtually every time Nashville was early to emerge as compared to the rest of the country. So all we did was say, hey, remember who we are and what we stand for, and we'll do fine.
You know, that's a really good insight, because when you start thinking about what continues to make Nashville bankable, if you will, that's something that strikes me. When I came here 25 years ago, first of all, just the pure diversity of industry that exists here was mind-boggling to me. And then I love the example of how, really, from a historical standpoint, the location of Nashville, the famous statistic that we're I guess 50% of the U.S. population is within 600 miles. Crazy statistics like that. That's really good insight. So what do you do then, Ralph, in those cases where you've got a very clear culture? You know who you are. You've demonstrated success with that. But then you get maybe a new person on the team, a new member in the organization, and they just don't seem to be fitting in with the culture. What do you do when you get that situation as a leader?
Well, I actually believe that the solution is established at the very beginning of the relationship. When I first got to the chamber 8 years ago, I stood up in front of the staff and I just said, there are two things I really care about. And if you do this at the chamber, people know what that is. I said, number one, I care about performance. And if you can't perform, then we're going to sit down and talk about what's it going to take for you to get to performance. And then if we find that you can't perform, that this job isn't a fit, then we'll help you find the right place to be a performer. And I said the second thing is actually the first thing, and that is team integrity. I expect team integrity. We only elevate our teammates. We don't undermine and undercut our teammates.
Right.
And so if there's a lapse in that, then that is a lapse in trust. If you can't support your teammates' performance and accomplishment, then that's a lapse in trust, and that's a rapid, unceremonious exit from the organization. And I'm just really proud to say that in these ensuing 8 years, there have only been a couple of times where we've had a team lapse, and in virtually every case, we've had excellent performance from people. But coming back to your question, when we find a person that isn't a fit, we know they have competence and capability in some way. We're either going to find a place for that competence to be deployed in our organization, or we're going to help them find a place elsewhere where they can deploy that. But to come back to that question, all of that understanding gets established at the very beginning of the conversation when we say, again, with clarity, these are our expectations. I remember in that first staff meeting, staff person raised their hand and said, well, what are you going to do about morale? Morale's a little down here. What are you going to do about it? And I said, I really don't care about morale. I think if you're winning and you feel fulfilled in your leadership role in the organization, your morale's going to take care of itself. There's no amount of jeans days we can have at the chamber that are going to change that.
That's awesome. You know, this notion of kind of being open and honest with people. I find that in many instances, leaders who are not willing to do that, often they just don't win, to use the term winning. You know, what's it like when you have situations where you can't quite be open and honest with people, right? You know, the variables are such that you can't tell them what you'd really like to tell them.
You know, I keep going back to expectations and clarity, and what I would say to you is there are very few things in the operation of our organization that we can't be open about, particularly with our teammates. There are personnel issues, there are specific personal issues that might not be a part of the general conversation, but you know, back when the recession first hit, the chamber suffered a financial decline, as other organizations did at the time as well. We gathered the group together, we said, we're going to preserve our people talent first, but we need to redirect ourselves in this recessionary time. So we shut the chamber down for a day. Pam Daly was the person who recommended that. Shut the chamber down for a day, and we had every single staff person participate in what's going to be our new plan going forward. That new plan was so successful that the following year we were selected Chamber of the Year on a national basis. But it was the fact that we were open and clear about our challenge. We engaged everyone in creating the solution that helped us find our way out of that. But to answer your question more directly, there's just not much that happens to the organization that you shouldn't share. If you can't trust your teammates to take that information and use it effectively and wisely, then you probably need different teammates.
So you all, what you're saying to me is you didn't get a group of senior leaders in a room or go off to a retreat center somewhere in Colorado. You actually sat down with the team. Now, why did you do that?
Well, the reason we sat down with the team was that they were going to be the genesis of whatever we needed to do. We needed the team to be engaged in precisely the right activity. Our situation was that our resources had declined, but the expectation of our performance hadn't declined.
That's a good point.
And so the people that were engaged on the team are a primary resource to achieving what's expected. So we had to sit down with the team and say, how are we still going to get there?
That's awesome.
Yeah.
You know, in the partnership we have here with Trevecca's Masters of Organizational Leadership program, one of their goals is they want to make sure that their graduates at the master's level really are people who can go out and execute. They want them to be more than just people who come in with a bunch of theory.
Right.
You know, from your vantage point, Ralph, what are some of the key, I like to call them mindsets and methods. What are some of the key things you think people coming through the MOL program need to make sure that they are really good at when they sort of transition to the next level in their career?
That's another really great question. I'm not sure I can answer it in a brief time. You know, an awful lot of what they need to do has to do with what's inside them.
Okay.
They have to be willing to make decisions. They have to be willing to be accountable for the results of those decisions. They have to be ready to adapt to changing circumstances. They have to be willing to communicate with other people.
Right.
But all of that, I think, is predicated on finding an environment where leadership is valued. When leadership is valued, latitude is provided to people to move things forward.
I like that. That's good.
If I were counseling someone who's moving out into the work world, out of the academic world, I would say, first of all, find a winner. Find out how they do it, how they win. In our case, we hire people who can lead first, and that means decision-making, accountability, all of those things I spoke of earlier. But then we also furnish them with 5 models of the way we operate. As an organization, it's helpful that when we speak about how to build a plan,
Okay.
that we create a common vocabulary, we create a common form so that people can answer the key questions of what do we believe, why do we exist, what will we do, how will we do it. When we're managing staff, we use a situational leadership model, the old Hersey Blanchard model. But what that says is that we're going to modify our style to fit the individual as they approach a certain task. Well, it's helpful if everybody in the organization understands how that model works.
Exactly.
One of the fun things I think we do, and Alan Hovius is the person that helped us structure this, decision making is key to speed. If we're going to adapt and move and impact with speed, people have to be able to make decisions, but what decisions do they get to make? Right. So Alan drew a little boat on the screen, and it had a little water line on it, and he said, okay, now if our problem is below the water line, that's something Ralph needs to know about. If the problem is above the water line, then that's something senior management needs to know about. But if that problem is in the sail, if there's just a hole in the sail, we're still going to get where we're going, but somebody needs to decide and fix that sail. Well, what that did after we had further discussion was say, here are the 6 things that Ralph needs to stay in touch with.
That's awesome. All
the rest of those things, have at it. Make it work. Decide and drive.
So where did you gain I'll use the word comfort, where did you gain the confidence to be okay with that? Because that's a beautiful process, but at some point you have to still be willing to let that thing work.
Actually, I think the question might be better, where did I gain the reliance on all of that talent in the past? I think I was blessed early on in my career with people who operated that way. I had several experiences of great leaders that relied on each of us to make our contribution and be responsible for that contribution. I also worked for leaders that wanted to have a thumb on everything all the time. Right. And I just noticed in each of those organizations, an organization that hired leaders and then empowered them to lead moved faster, moved more effectively. And then those organizations where there was a lot of control exerted from the top, they didn't move as effectively or as quickly. But I also learned in those great leadership circumstances that you have to have clarity on key questions.
Mm-hmm.
You have to know what you're in business to do.
Yep.
You have to know what your customers expect, and you have to know what you're expected to do well and what you do actually do well.
Mm-hmm.
You know, there's a little bit of a combination in what people want you to do well and what you actually do well.
Sure. You know, as I'm hearing you say this, it's leading me to a question that I have really, I think, only asked one time in this whole C-Seat series, and the question is, so when's the book coming now?
You're nice to say that, but I would have to have so many footnotes from all the people that I've learned from that the book would be outweighed by the footnotes. I've had some great mentors and the great opportunity to have experiences. I remember once in my second job out of college, I was a brand new executive director of a nonprofit in Jackson, Mississippi. And I made a decision as the executive director that put that organization in some financial distress.
All right.
Temporarily and briefly. And so I went to the board and I said, I've made this decision. It's put us in some financial distress. Here's my plan for moving forward. And I remember Lamar Maxwell, a guy that was my board chairman at the time, a great Southern gentleman in Jackson, Mississippi. After the board meeting was over, he put his arm around my shoulder and he said, now, Ralph, that wasn't the excellent job that we have come to expect from you, but I'm sure that we'll recover well. And I learned a lot because he gently said, we're holding you accountable,
Right.
but you have the opportunity to recover, and we have faith in your opportunity to recover.
Right.
It's a lot of those little events in your life that you learn from that help capable people fulfill themselves.
Mm-hmm.
And to some extent, that's what I see my job as a CEO as doing. Is my job as a CEO is to create an environment where capable people can fulfill themselves by pursuing the direction that our organization needs to pursue.
Mm-hmm. That's really good. You know, this process you just described, for me at some level, it sounds like you were always what I'm going to call sort of juxtaposing. Here's the way to do it, and here's the way sort of not to do it.
Mm-hmm.
And it's sad to me that so often people get so they get so overwhelmed with the here's how not to do it that they aren't learning from they aren't learning. But it sounds like that's something you really have been able to do to get to where you are right now.
If you're not going to be perfect, everything's not going to work. But if you are not trying out new things, then you're never going to find more productive ways to get things done.
Mm-hmm.
You know, it's common around our place to talk about this. If you walk into my office and you say, I got a problem, and you tell me what the problem is, my only expectation is that you're going to tell me how you plan to adapt.
Sure.
Thanks for letting me know. Here are some ideas that might improve upon that adaptation idea. But you have to be trying things. You have to be attempting new things. Mm-hmm. Life changes too quickly, and in circumstances and the environment change too quickly.
And you know, you said something I want to go back to. I think it's really big. You said we try to hire leaders.
Right.
Right. You didn't say we try to hire people. We try to fill slots. You didn't even use the word talent. You said we hire leaders. Talk about that a little bit more from a cultural standpoint.
Well, the mandate our organization has is a leadership mandate. When we facilitate community leadership, we have to be populated by leaders to be able to execute that. Mm-hmm. So we hire people that in some cases have demonstrated leadership capability, but in some cases just thirst to demonstrate their leadership capability. And so if we're going to cover the territory that purpose statement indicates, we're going to have 50 people in our organization that can decide and drive what they're doing. Mm-hmm. They're always working in partnership with someone else in the community, whether it's an organization or an individual. And at least for my definition of leadership, it is the ability to work with others. One of the great experiences of my life from a leadership perspective was when the Music City Center Coalition existed. We started off with 4 or 5 people sitting around the table to sort of hatch the idea of the convention center. But by the time that work was done 3 or 4 years later, we had 20 people sitting around the table.
Yep.
And what I enjoyed about that activity was that, Derek, at different times in the process, someone other than the chairman had to rise up and take control of the group because we were dependent on leadership only they could provide at that moment.
It's really good.
And that rotated around the room. Not only did we achieve the goal, but the people that are around the table felt indispensable to achieving that goal, and all that did was energize them to go do other things for the community. So that's what we try to create in our staff culture as well. You know, take a leadership role, drive your leadership decisions, and that's going to energize you to achieve even more.
You know, they got knocked out of the playoffs this year, but the San Antonio Spurs, who obviously are really going to go down as a legendary team with their top 3 stars and their coach. But one of the things that I saw recently in a documentary on them is that sometimes Popovich, the head coach, would literally step away from the huddle and allow a Manu Ginobili or Tim Duncan or Tony Parker or even other players to literally take over the coaching role of the team. And that's what I feel like I hear you saying, that the focus was not so much on who was the quote unquote leader of the pack, but who can lead us the way we need to be led right now. And that really strikes me as something that people ought to really take away from what you're saying today.
Well, go back to Stephen Ambrose's book on D-Day and his story about Teddy Roosevelt, the 3rd or 4th or somewhere in that lineage, where he lands on the beach and a soldier comes up to him and says, "According to our map, we are a mile off our landing point. What will we do now?" And he says, "Well, we'll start the war from here."
That's right.
You know, that all the commanders were back on the boats out in the channel, but Teddy Roosevelt was in charge, and they began the war from there. A lot of people think that was the difference on D-Day on those beaches. Well, it's the same way to me in everyday life. It's the same way if you're moving an organization or a community forward. And I'll depart for a little bit from that comment to say, you know, Nashville is what it is. I mean, the DNA of Nashville was planted really in the 1860s when that distribution center concept became key to its economy. Well, as prosperity grew in the community, more people arrived in Nashville. And when those people arrived in Nashville, they found people who had preceded them who were willing to reach out and help.
Right.
Now, you go to the healthcare industry, which has grown here. I mean, healthcare, this was an industry built from the ground up in Nashville. Well, they had that same mentality in the 70s and 80s and 90s, where as other people wanted to engage in the healthcare industry, the leaders in the industry said, well, we'll help. You have a good idea. We'll be your first contract, or we'll make an equity investment in you. That's the DNA of Nashville. Our job is to try to help channel that in the proper direction through the direction of our community leadership. And as staff, we have an implementation leadership requirement. We got to go out there and, as you said earlier, execute.
Right. That's good. Well, one more question, and that basically is this. So as you think about the Nashville of tomorrow, the million new people, I don't know where they're going to live or where they're going to drive, but they're coming. We know they're coming. But when you think about the Nashville of tomorrow, What are some aspects of the Chamber's culture that you definitely want to make sure stay intact?
Well, I think we definitely want to make Nashville's openness, friendliness, and inclusivity a feature going forward. Mm-hmm. And I think among those 1,500 people a month we see moving in here, that is something that they are also drawn to. Mm-hmm. That's part of what draws people here. I think that we want to continue to do the things that allows people to fulfill opportunity. You know, everyone should have a great education. Mm-hmm. Everyone should be able to have a good job or build a business enterprise. And everyone should have a mentality of giving back to the community. You know, businesses draw resource out of the community. They have a responsibility to restore that resource to the community. Right. Part of what makes Nashville unusual is that I think that the business community takes that responsibility on. They know they have that obligation.
I totally agree with that. I tell you, I knew this was going to be a great conversation. Really appreciate you being with us, Ralph. Thanks a lot.
Well, thank you for inviting me.